All right, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. We are live on for this mid-February here, early February MSP Success webinar. And this is going to be a really good one. I think it's really unlike anything that we have done on our MSP Success webinar series at all, is that we've got a live action demo with Scott Wright, the CEO of ClickArmor, brand new software within this industry. And you guys are really going to like of what you're seeing on this. I think it's an area, when I saw this, I was blown away with really of what they're doing in the whole side of cybersecurity and compliance awareness training. Something that if you're like I am, I'm taking it from the user side of things, it is as boring as could be, and I'm trying to get through it as quick as possible. Scott's going to walk it through with his tools that really take this to a whole complete different level here on the software. And so a couple housekeeping items just as we're on here. One of them is we're going to have plenty of time for questions as we're going through. Feel free to post up your questions, ideally in the Q&A versus the chat. Just a little bit easier to manage. Make sure that we get everything answered as we're going through. If you have any questions or comments there, you can post them up in the chat, and maybe I'll just actually start it here of posting up to the chat of anyone. So why don't you post up, if you're on the call here, post up of where you're listening in from. I know we're here in Nashville. Scott, you're up in Canada.
That's
right. Where are you at?
We're
in Canada?
Ottawa, Canada, the capital.
Right. Yeah. So for anyone in there, I'm seeing Jerry's in Dallas. There, I heard that the ice was getting Dallas already. This morning, Chuck is in Redondo Beach, and so just post that up of where you're listening in from. And Scott, well, we got Chris from over in the UK as well here, so we have a intercontinental crowd that we've got there, and Miko from Aloha from Hawaii. So we're all over the place with this. So Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll be here for questions as they're coming in. So I'll duck into the call every once in a while.
That's awesome. Thanks very much, Jeff. Really appreciate your intro, and really exciting to be here with you folks. Thanks very much for taking the time. It's going to be, I think, an interactive and hopefully fun session for you. A couple of things to note. One is I'm going to start with, or various points during the presentation, I'm going to ask a question or two, and some of them are going to be obviously rhetorical. We can have you think about some stuff before we move on, just to get things engaged here. And once we get going, I might ask you questions. As Jeff said, feel free to answer in the Q&A, or actually we'll do that, the answers to our stuff in the chat is probably better. Just so we can see the trends. Feel free to share your experiences or stories, anonymized if you need to, but just to, I think, add value for people and get everybody sort of engaged in this. I'd love to see some participation there. I'm going to be monitoring a couple of different chat channels, actually, so we'll hopefully get everybody's input there. So besides that, I have to say, we're also going to have some prizes. So what kind of a gamification company would we be if we didn't have prizes, right? But you got to wait to the end. So hopefully lots of stuff here to keep you engaged. And I'm going to start with the quick question is, what is ClickArmor? And just a very quick overview, it's really the first gamified learning platform for cybersecurity awareness and built specifically for MSPs. And the reason that I built it, I started doing security awareness 10 years ago teaching. Before that, I was a security engineer. I learned we had lots of great security technologies, antivirus, firewalls, intrusion detection, authentication. But I noticed that nobody was really paying much attention to the end users, or what I call the human endpoints. And so I got really interested in the human vulnerability parts of business security. And so I've had podcasts going now for over 10 years. I did some work with Symantec, dropping smartphones in what we call the Honey Stick project. So all of this kind of taught me that it's really important to have some engagement and interesting things to talk about when you're teaching people things. And so I learned about gamification a little bit at the beginning, but more and more over time, I realized that gamification is really important for awareness training in particular. And that's what sets it apart from all the other kinds of training that we could talk about. I also want to introduce JP Jovin, who's our head of strategy. And you might recognize JP from his days at SolarWinds Enable, over 10 years in the MSP industry. And he's really helped us guide the design and architecture of this product to be focused on MSP requirements. So if I get some deep MSP questions, I might call it JP to answer them. But let's get started. I'm going to start with something that you won't normally see in a PowerPoint deck. This is really something taken right out of the platform. So this is how we kind of present things. I'd like to start by looking at the kinds of threats and vulnerabilities we deal with. Let's talk about which attack target is the most difficult to secure. So if you look at mobile devices, servers, customers, employees, applications, private clouds, I could pick many, but I picked enough of these to show that you're probably pretty familiar with how to secure many of these things, but one of these things doesn't really belong, right? You're probably not as confident in how to perfectly secure your customers' employees versus all these other technologies. And that's okay. We're going to learn more about, what's involved there and why, but one of the things that I want to draw your attention to is the fact that 90% of all security breaches now involve employees, whether it's phishing or social engineering attacks. And those are things that we haven't really done well. And that's, as I said earlier on, I've learned over time why security awareness is not working. I'm going to share some of that knowledge with you. I'd also like to look at things from an attacker's point of view and say, attackers, they're good at some stuff. How well are they able to exploit, different kinds of things, everything from antivirus and multi-factor to the pandemic. Well, if you look at the pandemic, I put that in there because back in the summer, we saw a 300% increase in phishing websites as a result of the pandemic and people working at home, people being more interested in getting news about, the health information and things like that. And so the attackers are really agile at taking the news of the day and being able to exploit that. But even looking at some of our mature technologies, antivirus has been around forever. Can attackers now exploit that? Well, of course they can. What they do is when they do their malware, targeted malware they want to launch on a network, they will run their own malware variant against every version of current antivirus to make sure it will get through. And so they have a guarantee that it will at least get in long enough to survive and download a new payload. Many times, as you've probably heard, malware can sit on your network for 6 months or more before it's detected. So attackers have figured out how to exploit antivirus software. Multi-factor authentication, we all know is really important. It's essential, but they can get around that through man-in-the-middle attacks, right? So that's happening all the time. All this to say that, there's really not much that the attackers haven't been able to exploit. They're always a little bit ahead of us. And so, we see this as an evolving threat landscape. But what are we doing on the defensive side? And I like the quote from Charles Darwin that says, it's not the strongest of the species that survives or the most intelligent, it's the one that's adaptable to the change. And when you think about the fact that, even our human endpoints that have probably the most powerful, computing power in the history of time, we've got the equivalent vulnerabilities, and we're not actually able to evolve with the threats. So it's a constant cat and mouse game, and the threats are really able to stay ahead of us. So I wanted to just stop for a second and ask people if they might put in the chat, any stories or quick notes about what's the most recent notable impact from a security incident that involved an end user. So, I'll just wait a second here to see what people say. So we've got, gift card scams. Yeah, so $7,000 lost to a gift card scam. That's a pretty big one. And ransomware. Yeah, had to work the weekend. Yep, good. So the impacts of ineffective awareness training. Once we take a look at, how vulnerable we are, what are the things that impact us, specifically in the MSP world? We've got extreme customer dissatisfaction. If somebody clicks on something, causes that ransomware, or does that gift card thing, you can probably be held responsible. Maybe it's not fair, but the clients are starting to hold MSPs responsible for things like email account takeovers that end up in some kind of payment fraud, right, on fraudulent invoices. So it may be a gray area, but these kinds of things we're starting to see happening. Then on top of that, there's penalties to customers, that could be in the form of legal lawsuits or remediation lawsuits as well. Then, of course, you've got the bad PR and reputation. I don't need to tell you guys too much about the fear, uncertainty, and doubt stuff. You know that the consequences of security breaches are big, but we want to focus on the things that we're still not adapting to as far as end users, and the things that we can really make the most improvements on as we go forward. So I want to share a couple of things, lessons learned from my time in teaching security awareness. Number one thing about phishing is that few end users know as much as you think they do, right? So if you've had a chance to speak with any of your end users, especially ones that have been through, any kind of previous training, you might be really surprised that they still don't really know, what a character substitution in a link looks like. And that can be really tough if you're telling them to be careful. What are they looking for? So those are things that we have to stop taking for granted, that people really know what they're doing. On the social engineering side, it's also interesting because you get the feeling that a lot of people, almost everybody, thinks they won't be targeted, or that a social engineering attacker won't go to the trouble of coming up with some fake story to convince them to just give them a little bit of information, right? They don't realize they can be the stepping stone. So those are a couple of the main things that have really resonated with me over the years. Some of the other examples of failures to adapt that we've seen in the MSP industry, we've had MSPs tell us, they get a call from a customer that says, hey, thanks a lot for setting up that new faxing feature. And the MSP is going, what faxing feature? We never set that up. And he says, well, I got an email just now that says I have a fax and I can click the link and pick it up there. I just wanted to thank you. Well, we know where that's going, right? And again, sort of a failure to adapt and realize that, yeah, MSPs won't do that stuff without telling you probably. And maybe you should think about this kind of new stuff, something that's brand new you weren't expecting. Another failure to adapt right within our security awareness ecosystem. You may have heard the story of the Chicago Tribune and GoDaddy. Both had similar experiences over the last couple of months where their IT team got really smart and decided to do phishing attacks that could actually, cause some pretty severe negative repercussions. And they may not have thought about this ahead of time. I doubt that they did. And that is, you're sending a message out saying, hey, you're due to all our cutbacks, you're entitled to a bonus of $5,000. And then they click on it and it says, no, sorry, that was a phishing test and you shouldn't have clicked on that. And here's why. So surprisingly, end users didn't like that. They end up going to Twitter and Facebook and posting to all their friends, how stupid is our IT team that they're testing us with these things in such a insensitive way. So there's more and more backlash around the poor use of phishing assessments. There's a good way to use them, but it actually takes a lot of effort and planning to do a good phishing assessment by email. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Thirdly, we're seeing stories of MSPs being sued. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but being held responsible for things like the fake invoice scams, where it can be traced back to an email account getting taken over, for example, and the MSP being held responsible and taken to court. So we've got to really sort of stay on top of this stuff. It is evolving quickly, but we have to figure out a way to at least get employees and users to be able to stop for just a few seconds longer than they are now and take note of the things that we think are obvious. But if we don't change something, then we know that these threats are going to continue to get worse. I'd just like to take a moment and ask anybody who wants to share an experience, if they've had any negative experiences from using phishing assessments. So any of those kinds of things where you've had, unfair, people feeling they're being targeted. I think there's one that I know of that I was going to mention, which is somebody after a phishing assessment, they went around and briefed people, and the offer was a free pizza, right? And somebody clicked on it. So they had to go brief them. And it turns out that as they're doing the briefing, the person's nodding their head. Yeah, okay. So can I still get my free pizza? It was really like, they're just not getting it, okay? So I'd just like to mention for a minute the human firewall analogy, right? We hear this quite often. It's convenient and it's a nice analogy at a high level, but I think it needs to be put in context, because if you're really talking about a firewall, you're talking about setting rules that are applied, pretty regularly, consistently. But the thing that happens with our human firewalls is they can, be influenced not only by the instructions we give them, but the mood they're in, the priorities they have, the momentary distractions, the perception of situations. If they don't think they're going to be targeted, then maybe the rules don't apply so much. And just general experience, nothing went wrong yesterday when I did this, so it can probably be okay this time. So I really want you to be careful if you're using that analogy of the human firewall, unless you can clarify the context, then it can be useful. But we really need to focus on the fact that the humans need to be motivated to be the firewall. So one of the things that I think is important is to understand the various different factors that lead to a lack of awareness. We can talk about these weaknesses all over the place, but there has to be some structure behind this. And the way that I talk about it is, first of all, employees don't understand the risks. If you hear it won't happen to me, or I don't care, then those are problems of people not understanding the risks. If they don't understand their role in securing corporate information systems, you hear things like, it's not my job to know security stuff. That's not why I was hired. That's an indication that they don't understand that security is really everybody's business. If you have a lack of engagement in your training content, we have what we call death by PowerPoint. And the pattern there is you get content delivered, you get a quiz, you get more content, you get another quiz. And if you fail the quiz, you go back and you redo it until you get it, right? So that doesn't mean you've actually learned something, but it's really just total disengagement with the content. And they know they only have to do it once a year. So once they get it over with, they've endured it and they're done. So really, it's not helping awareness. The lack of practice in detecting and responding to threats. We really don't have a way to easily make people practice, right? So we need to exercise people's skills at being able to spot email addresses that look suspicious, rather than just doing it once a month with a phishing assessment or something like that. It's really not allowing them to practice the skills that we need them to be. It's kind of like a life skill, right? Like CPR. But how do we do that when people are saying, this is so painful, don't make me do this again? It's a real problem. Content is not up to date or not relevant. I've had customers that say, yeah, we used an off-the-shelf product, we put everybody through it, and then we realized we had to send out a note to say, you know what, the content isn't quite right here. We don't do things that way. Our mobile setup is not the same. So please disregard the training in this spot and do this instead, right? So how confusing is that for end users when they're getting guidance and then adjusted guidance? It's really not helpful for awareness. It doesn't give them a good feeling, and it's not a good security culture. And then finally, if you aren't able to measure the proficiency of the program, then you really can't be sure of how well your awareness program is working. So if you're only tracking the completion of the training, then you have no other indicators to say whether people really know or whether your entire team knows how to defend against those kinds of attacks. So now that we get to talk more about the fun stuff, how do we solve all this problem of a lack of awareness, the fast evolving threats, and the slow adaptation that we've had so far? So when you look at traditional awareness training, I've picked up this information over the years, and we know from studies that 61% of employees who receive traditional training are feeling unmotivated and bored. And we all know why. It's the same girl holding out her hand and looking at a laptop quizzically. It's not really that motivating. But when you're able to engage people with gamification, they start to get highly motivated, and it's 83% of the time they have a better response. And so they're more receptive to actually learning. And that's really the essence of putting together a platform that lets us build what I call a self-defending team. So when you can gamify everything from the top down, whether it's the leaderboard or the total score, all the way down to every interaction that the person has with the system, causing them to have to think a little bit, it's not as tiring as you would imagine. There's really actually more motivation behind it than clicking through things. They have to think, they're challenged, and challenge is actually one element of gamification that people really undervalue. It's the fact that we can challenge people in a positive way means they will actually start to think and be engaged. On top of that, if we have an environment where we're able to capture all of that engagement and the responses from people, then we see the opportunity to gather a lot more rich data about vulnerability and about proficiency, so we can have more assurance about what's going on. So at this point, I wanted to stop again and just ask people maybe to put in the chat, what apps or products have you seen before that are gamified? It's happening more and more. It's becoming really the future of technology. Any kind of technology where you want people to actually interact more, you see more gamification. And so let's see, what have we got? Things like Fitbits, Duolingo, it's for learning a language, right? Trailhead, Nike. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of products that are now becoming much more using gamification. It's not just a single thing that you can say, yeah, that's gamified. There are a whole bunch of elements within a gamification strategy. So I'm not going to go into all the elements of what makes something gamified, but what I'd like to do is talk about the key things that gamification could do to help with security awareness. Number one is interactive engagement. As you know, you need to get people interested to actually get them started. If you can't get them motivated to pay attention in the first place, you're kind of lost. Second, you have to provide them with relevant feedback that drives some level of understanding, not just, okay, yeah, I get it, move on. They have to really say, okay, why didn't I get this right? Give them some more interactive feedback. Thirdly, a repetition capability, something that reinforces knowledge and knowledge retention. Really important, and gamification really helps with that. Number four is really important, and it's never really been done well, aside from a very, very thin area of phishing assessments, right? We know that phishing assessments are a safe way for people to practice spotting phishing attacks, but it's a very, very limited way, because you only get to see that one message one time. And if you make a mistake or you didn't see it, the metrics really get quite skewed. So having a safe place where people can practice their risk decisions in a way that we can actually control the variables and measure their responses is something that gamification is really well suited to. Finally, inside that environment, as I mentioned before, we've got metrics capability to gather all of the responses and then assess risks from that. So just a quick visual on that, the engagement part of it, everybody knows games can be really engaging. Many of you are probably gamers. And, we used to say, well, the kids know video games, but, there's probably more adults now playing games. I'm not a gamer myself, but I love this element of gamification because it's going to be everywhere. It's got to be used to engage people. So we get that engagement, we get people to at least pay attention long enough that we have a chance to get them to learn something. Then we have to use more gamification techniques once they're in to keep providing them with unexpected things or something that gives them some immediate feedback if they take an action. And that's really important. So we can do things like what we call harvesting. When you make a response to a quiz question, for example, you have the chance to go back in immediately and explore all the wrong answers. Why wasn't this right? And why was this one wrong? So that kind of immediate feedback gets people not only to learn, but it keeps them engaged. Thirdly, improved knowledge retention really comes with motivating people to go back in and try again. And of course, as I said before, it's really hard to do that with traditional systems that people, you got to pretty much threaten them and make it mandatory to do it in the first place. It's pretty hard to get them to do it more than once if it's useful at all. But if you have the right kind of environment where you can have that understanding and interaction, then you add a leaderboard or you add some other gamification elements, and people literally want to go back in and improve their results from before, whether it's how they're standing on the leaderboard or just a personal best to improve where they're weak. People love to see that they are doing well in this and this and this, and here's where they're not doing well. Well, then they're going to go back in and focus on that. Fourthly, that area of being able to have a safe environment where you can make risky decisions. It goes anywhere from phishing to social engineering to way beyond. There are all kinds of risk scenarios or any kind of policy environment scenarios that you might want to exercise, things like harassment or values and ethics, all kinds of areas where you could simulate a situation or a scenario that isn't email based. And that opens up the door to a lot of different new kinds of awareness to address those issues that aren't all just about clicking on things. Finally, the metrics for real vulnerability assessment. I just wanted to share with you something we've set up called Can I Be Phished? And it's a way that we can actually do phishing assessments that are in a very different mode than what you're used to, but they have a much richer set of data. So there's a site that we set up called canibephished.com, and that will let you go in without having to log in. We'll ask for an email, but that's really just for us to be able to follow up with you. But this really is an easy way to have people assess themselves on how well they can spot phishing messages. So you'll get 10 messages. You have to decide if they're safe or suspicious based on sender, by link, etc. Right? So we've set this whole thing up, and over, I think, several hundred people who've used it, we were able to get a pretty consistent picture of what the environment looks like in terms of general public's vulnerability. And you can do this for your own organization. And when you start with ClickArmor, we'll do this for free if you want, where you don't have to register people specifically into the system right away. You can just send them a URL, and we will gather data around, and it's anonymized. So basically just how many people got all of them right, how many people got one right, two right, etc. So we get a much better feel for how well people understand how to analyze a message. Now think about the fact that you're in a gamified environment and people are going to try and game the system, right? They're going to say, well, I'm not going to get tricked, so I'm going to say they're all safe. Well, that doesn't work, because we can tell if they didn't get it right because they were overly cautious, then that means they really didn't know how to spot the clues in the message. So that tells us something different about what we need to do to fix the problem that we have. And we have a chance to actually give people positive reinforcement to say, hey, you know what? 10% of you guys got everything right. And that really helps the security culture. So these are things that we can address, and certainly we can follow up later and answer questions on all of these things. But the general idea here is that we're engaging people, they're learning, they're able to practice in the risk environment, and then we can gather the data and make good use of it for compliance and for assurance. So before we go into sort of broader Q&A and start answering questions, I just wanted to give you a view of how we're positioning ClickArmor to MSP partners. Basically, we think it's an effective program to replace either what you've got now, or even as a greenfield to be able to bring new value to your customers. It'll provide better assurance and compliance reporting for you to have more confidence in what you're telling either auditors or customers to say, how well are we doing? And it's actually a way of generating that cross-generational engagement. It's everybody says, well, yeah, the young people, they love those games, right? But actually the seniors do too. And it's just for different reasons. It's something that doesn't scare them. It's a little more friendly. So we think that the effectiveness of this will be really good for your customers. As far as business fit goes, we're offering something that you may or may not have had before with current vendors, and that is floating licenses across all your customers. So that means that if you get a license for some number of users, say 1,000 users, then you can use that license for any of your customers. And all we need to do is you can literally say, I want to deactivate this company and reactivate these users in these two companies, et cetera. So it means you don't have to come back and redo any kind of licensing agreements. just because you changed companies that you want to deploy to. We have a monthly pay-as-you-go plan, which might be different than what you've seen with some vendors. We have tailorable content, meaning that all of those scenarios and phishing assessment messages that you've seen are actually tailorable. We can put any content, any senders, any links that you want to have, any number of messages. We can have different sets for different groups within organizations or different industries, for example. We offer a done-for-you partner model, which means as little tool fatigue as possible. We'll do help you set up onboarding in terms of syncing with directories and things like that. But then after that, we'll take care of the rest if you want us to. The content library covers currently phishing, social engineering, working from home. We've got PCI and HIPAA as well that we're able to provide. So these are areas, we have a lot more ideas I mentioned before in terms of HR types of compliance programs, and certainly more advanced and other security domains that people need to understand are available. Now, what is this going to cost? So we have an early adopter special right now that we're inviting you folks to, and that is a prepaid annual license of $5,000 for 2,500 users. And also, if you don't want to do a prepaid 5,000, then you could do a monthly 250 for 500 users. So it's 50 cents per user per month, basically. So that's the package that we are offering, and love to talk to you more about how you can differentiate yourself from your competitors and offer something new and innovative. Now, I promised there would be prizes, so here we are. This is the part you've all been waiting for. What we'd like to do in order to help you learn more about ClickArmor is one of two things. You can book a live demo with us at our clickarmor.ca/MSP website, and there's a quick form you can do there. You can use a promo code MSP21 there. You can also request a trial account. You could do that through the same process, but we also have if you're on our website, you can find a request a trial link as well. We're going to say the first 3 people who complete a demo will get one of our fantastic free thermal mugs with the ClickArmor logo. Also, the first 3 or the top 3 players on the leaderboard as of the 15th of February get a free mug as well. So you can't beat that, right? So I think that covers the content we wanted to cover today, and just wanted to open it up to Jeff and see if he has any questions that people would like to ask.
Yeah, I definitely have quite a few questions that are in here, Scott. And one question on here, were you going to also, I know we were going to handle some questions. Did you want to show a little bit of the platform?
Yeah.
That might be
we have time.
Too,
I wasn't sure if we would have time, but for sure we could do a demo as well.
Sure.
So
here, let me jump into a couple of these questions. One of them, Maurice is asking, are you only in the MSP channel, or do you sell to anyone direct?
Sure. So we are focusing only on the MSP channel, but we certainly do get inquiries from businesses that want to use the product. What we will be doing is looking for partners who want to take over ownership of that customer, if the territory is the right territory, for sure. So that's basically, we're not turning down business, but we're certainly not going after any businesses directly.
And Scott, maybe I can just chime in on this one. So we're a relatively young company, and this is really our first launch to the MSP market. But we're an MSP first company, and the end state certainly is that we will be a channel only or an MSP only company. So you can feel very confident that we're going to work with you in a true sense of partnership and spirit of partnership. And I know we hear a lot of feedback from you, the MSP community, that some of the vendors out there that are providing, cybersecurity awareness are not exactly channel-friendly companies. To say, I'm going to be extremely polite in my Canadian way, but we're dedicated to working in a partnership with you, so you can feel confident that we've got your best interests in mind.
Yep. And
Yeah, one thing that I would add on that too is that in working with Scott and JP, as Scott mentioned early on the call, is that JP is a longtime veteran of the MSP market, knows the MSP market in that way, and as an advisor and really looking at how they're going about. It's exactly what JP was saying, is that they know that it's extremely important there as it's launched in the MSP market. Do you have, one of the questions here that came in was, Scott, do you have customer using ClickArmor right now?
Yeah, we do actually. We've had the product, our initial strategy before we met JP actually was we built a minimum viable product. We did have a few customers that we were selling to directly that are small. Some are small in the 100, 200 range, but we now have a customer that's in the 10,000 range. So it's really picked up. Yeah, we've got people using the product right now for sure.
What are you seeing with those current customers on participation rates from the employees?
Yeah, it's actually been beyond my expectations in terms of people when they are told by their HR team or their MSP that they're doing this new program, that they get on right away. And we saw one case where an organization was 90% completion within a month, right, without bothering anybody to actually go through it. And I've been in other organizations with traditional training, and it took 2 years to get 80% of the people through a program.
Yeah, why don't we do this? I know we've got quite a few questions, but I know you've got it up on your screen right now here, Scott. Why don't you show a little bit of some of the fun features?
Yeah, I'll just do a little tour, and certainly we can do a live demo for people who want it. But just a little tour. So this is your login screen as an end user. You see your profile, your points, your rank, your progress. You can see the courses, modules that you've been assigned, and of course the leaderboard. Some people don't want to reveal who they are. They can choose an avatar. They can choose an anonymous name. Other people are more confident. They'll put in their real name. Once you go into a module, I'm just going to zip through here, and just due to internet latency, I don't want things to be slowed down. So I'm just going to go tab to tab. This is an example of a learning quiz where we can actually teach people in a safe and kind of stress-free way. You can do a sort of Duolingo implied learning methodology where you can say, okay, let's just ask questions and people don't feel under stress. They can guess if they want. But let's just say, is it safe to click on an email sender's name and to see the address? And I've had IT guys in a demo say false, right? And so you say false, and well, you know what? It is true that it's safe to click on a sender's name. Sometimes that's the only way, and that's the feedback we'll give you. If you go in and do what we call harvesting, you can click on the answers, all the answer options to learn about why they were right or wrong. So that's the learning quiz, and we do, I'll just sort of skip ahead. So there's multiple choice versions. There are what we call concept matching, meaning you can have multiple items that are right and gather harvesting feedback for all of those later on. And so the heart of what I wanted to get to in phishing was to say, to properly assess people's knowledge of how to evaluate a phishing message, it's nice to have an inbox kind of context where you can show people an email and say, what would I normally do to decide if this is safe or not? Well, I've just taught them in that last lesson that they can click on the sender name to see the email. And so they can do that. They can decide, okay, this looks like a valid link or a valid sender. I can hover over the hyperlink and see that it says messages.linkedin.com. So it's not the real LinkedIn. So if they're smart enough, astute enough to catch that little typo, then they're good. But if they say that this is safe, they'll immediately get feedback that says, you know what, this was suspicious because it said LinkedIn instead of LinkedIn. And so that's the immediate feedback I was telling you about. So we have any number of messages we can put up here and change them from month to month. On the social engineering course, it's really kind of fun because we add a new kind of game mechanics every once in a while. And in this case, we're using a Boggle word search. So you can just complete the sentence by saying, with a bit of something, a social engineer can find out a lot about you. So you just have to find Greece, no, space, no, research. How about that? So a bit of research. and we filled in the blank and we get the correct answer, and we can again harvest, get a little bit more information. So it's just a fun, stress-free way for people to learn. And we do this to teach them the definitions and the concepts that are important for them to be able to remember. And then once they've got those down, then we have what we call our social simulations. And the social simulations are really powerful because it lets us create these scenarios like, Helen is out on lunch break and she gets a text from Phil in marketing. Phil wants her to go buy some gift cards. And before she decides yes or no, she has a chance to say, call me and let's talk about it, which is the right answer. But he says, sorry, can't, I'm busy. Now she has a decision to make. If he says, so can you help me? Well, what's she going to do? Is she going to ask what kind of cards, or is she going to say, sorry, I can't do that. Let's talk about it back in the office. So she gets that right. So we have a number of different safe and unsafe scenarios that people have to go through. They have to think a little bit, do a little bit of interaction, and then they make a final decision. Then they learn what was right and what was wrong. And this is what we talk about, those safe risk scenarios that we can put people in virtually any situation. And all of this, again, is possible to be customized. One last view is just to look at the admin capabilities. So, the ability to be able to enable courses, disable courses, add students, upload students, put them in groups, and then get reports based on their scores or their participation and procedure or progress through the programs. So that was just a quick tour, but happy to give you a more detailed demo and even set you up as a free user so you can see yourself on the leaderboard and compete for that priceless mug.
Scott, what do you see of the companies that are using ClickArmor right now, using for prizes? Are they doing this of just to compete for that #1 spot on the leaderboard? You mentioned of bettering whatever their best score is of where it's at.
Yeah.
Like what do you see of how they're using this of part of the gamification?
Yeah, I mean, people love prizes, and if the company, you have to be careful. Sometimes there's an ethical issue within bigger organizations. Usually, you can get them to shell out maybe $100 for a Fitbit or something like that, right? To say this is going to be our prize, because it's nice because the Fitbit's gamified itself and it kind of reinforces the whole gamification thing. But yeah, things like Fitbits are popular, but even in the bigger organizations where you really can't have a budget to spend on actual prizes, there's a lot of value in not just the leaderboard, but having recognition, in the newsletter, or having, at an event, calling somebody out and congratulating them. Those are really effective ways that don't cost money and don't impact the ethics side of the equation.
Scott, a couple more questions here on the business.
Yeah, go for it, JP.
Yeah. So Patrick, I don't know if you're still on, but he was asking, can we register a customer to be a protected opportunity? The short answer is yes. In addition to our MSP program, we also have a reseller program. So if you're looking purely to resell it as opposed to delivering as a service, we can do that, and you can register opportunities. So we can follow up with you. We've got the same question, I believe, from two people, from Herb and Maria, who are both in Canada, not too far from us. I think, Herb, you're in Napanee. I saw on LinkedIn, and I think.
Yay, Napanee. All right.
So the home of Avril Lavigne, by the way.
That's right.
So the question is, do we have this available in French? And the short answer is it's
yes.
imminent. So it's a deliverable we had for a customer of ours. So
yeah.
We will. If anyone is interested in other languages, please let us know as well. I think Spanish.
Yeah, the platform is language capable, so yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I heard some pride there, JP, in the home of Avril Lavigne. I didn't hear I didn't hear anything about it like a home of Justin Bieber anywhere on anything. Maybe that's a little.
Anybody here from Stratford?
All right, keep on going.
We had another question here from Brent to go over the pricing again, if you can, Scott. If you're
sure. Let me see if I can get back to the right screen. There we are. One sec. Do you want to speak to that, JP?
Go for it.
So yeah, our pricing right now, we've been doing a lot of testing in the markets, talking to a lot of MSPs, and it varies depending on whether or not an MSP has bundled in the service already, and they really just need it to be not any more expensive. But what we find is that this price point should be really attractive. We want it to be a no-brainer, and that is $5,000 prepaid for an annual license for 2,500 users. Again, that's a floating license. So those 2,500 users, if you have 10,000 end users, you could use them across just 2,500 simultaneously. And then monthly would be $250 a month for 500 users. If there's questions about the quantities, you've got a lot less than that or a lot more than that, certainly reach out to us. We'll find a way to make it a no-brainer.
That's a question that just came up, actually. So can we not cater to your smaller quantities? The answer is absolutely. Our minimum quantity is 50. So not a problem at all. And again, if you're looking to resell, the pricing is a little bit different than this as well. So we can take that one offline.
What are you seeing? It could be for either of you here. Are the MSPs looking to add this as just part of their overall model of what they're pricing per month, or are they doing this as an add-on service?
I think we're seeing, Jeff, I think we're seeing 3 or 4 different, completely different models. So one obvious one is a pure greenfield. We're seeing a lot of MSPs who aren't offering cybersecurity awareness. So they're looking to cross-sell to their existing customer base. We see MSPs that already have some sort of video content, or they're doing lunch and learns, and they're looking to essentially replace what they're using today with something more engaging and more dynamic and more fun. And then we're seeing others who are selling this a la carte on an engagement basis to their customers. So we're really seeing a whole lot of flexibility in how it's delivered in the market.
Okay.
That's one of the things
I actually see I was going to say of how you just said that, of where I actually see this, and I'm always looking for some of these different opportunities of this. This does sound like, in some ways, based on some of your clientele that you already have, that it is potentially a foot in the door into some of those larger clients, of where you may have that spot offering for something to just to begin with, something they might not be able to do otherwise, to get into that large account, very non-threatening to the IT staff, because it's a solution. It's a software solution, but it gets in there for some of those larger deals at a pretty low price of per user, when you're only talking about on that prepaid $2 per year per user. Is I think I did the math right there.
Yeah, and certainly
you've got that ability to get in.
What we're seeing as well, Jeff, is in larger accounts, they may want to gamify some of their own content. So over time, we do have the capability today where you can inject, if you will, a customer's own content. So if you wanted to use their own policies or terminology or names of people or that sort of thing. But over time, we see that really as a way to differentiate against your competitors. From the perspective that in a larger account, they're going to want to have, standard content, yes, but they're also going to have somewhat modified or configurable or customizable or local content to their organization and their industry, right? In addition, I think Scott covered this, but we're heading down the PCI, the HIPAA route. There's a lot of privacy compliance as well that's looking ripe to be gamified, because that's super dry content. And I've been through it. I don't ask me to remember anything I've ever learned, because I don't. But I think if you gamified it in a fun way, I'd probably remember, a lot of it. So.
Yeah, and I should just also mention, don't think I mentioned it in the presentation, but part of my experience before we created ClickArmor, when I was doing awareness training, I was using one of the leading products on the market today, that as a partner kind of thing. And I hated sort of the setup, because I had to get a quote for the whole year. And when I wanted to change the number of users, I had to get a new quote, and it got prorated to the year end. And it was like pretty, not only complicated, but, you know, it's a big chunk to shell out for a large user base right up front. And then, so it made me, you know, when JP and I were talking about things, you know, what would make it easier for somebody who's already committed to one of those big players, who's already got an annual program, and they don't really want to pay a big chunk right now to switch to something else. And even the monthly program might be too much, but we can put what JP would call a ramped program together, right?
Another question
what
here is what kind of
go ahead,
reporting
JP.
capabilities do we have that an MSP can present to a customer during a QBR? So Scott, maybe, you know, show the leaderboard and the reporting again, but I can tell you, probably playing my hand here, and I shouldn't be, but I'm excited about this idea, is to have a risk dashboard for you, the MSP, where you could look at all of your customers, right? And kind of a heat map. So my red guys are the ones that are at risk, my yellow guys, somewhat at risk, my green guys are the good ones. So that's an opportunity for you now to go and drill into each one and provide some additional coaching or additional services or that type of thing. But we are reporting and analytics is one of the things that we're investing in substantially to provide you guys with a, you know, rebrandable, customizable report card for risk and assessment, and potentially for compliance purposes as well.
Yep.
So related question on that is from a sales collateral. So if someone's coming in and kind of a different angle of the QBR, oftentimes a QBR is the time that you can introduce a tool like this or software like this to be able to introduce it into that client. What type of sales collateral do you have to be able to help to be able to get that in? That's always one of the tricks with the new tools that come out, is there's so many things that are out there that I could be selling. What makes it easy to be able to get this into people's hands?
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, what I found the best thing to provide is a brochure that you can give to the management of the customer to say, here are the benefits, here are the things that we're going to do, here's how it's going to be rolled out. So you can give them an expectation of the experience. We could certainly even have an arrangement where the management gets to try it out themselves if they want to. That's certainly part of how we can support you for that. But there's also the case where some partners we've talked to really don't feel that they need to sell it so much as set the expectation and manage the communication during deployment. You know, if it's part of a rip and replace where it's a bundle and the customer's already paying for the service, it's more a question of giving the correct communication to the customer about what is about to happen when we deploy this new gamified thing. And there's usually a bit of a buzz around it, you know, because it's something quite new and different from what they've had before. So we'll support people on both the sales side and on the deployment side.
And on that deployment side, Bill was asking on here, what are the suggestions you can provide to get the users engaged? He said we tried other products, found typically less than 40% of the users even log in for the first time.
Yeah.
Short of a directive, how do you get people excited about it?
Well, that's a really fun part of the challenge, right? Is to say, okay, what can we do that would get people excited about joining? And usually, when you talk about the leaderboard, there's always a few people, right? There's maybe 3 or 4 at least that are going to be really keen. They're going to get on there first, and then word starts to spread. So, as I said, with some of our customers, they didn't really have to push anybody, and they got 90% within the first month. But that said, it can, depending on your culture, if you know it's going to take a little bit of a nudge because they're all, you know, conservative or, you know, don't really think that they're going to engage too quickly, we can certainly provide incentives in terms of maybe a small prize or something like that. And we can talk about that in terms of what kinds of prizes are worth putting up there. But as soon as you put a prize and a date, then you typically get a big bump in participation.
Good. And what was the participation rates that you were saying again? I know you mentioned it before.
It was
Ties back to-
90%. It was about a 100-person organization get 90% of their people in 1 month. So that was
Yeah.
pretty quick. That was without any actual sort of coercion or prizes even announced. Eventually they did, at the end of the 2-month period, they wanted to get people to go back in and do it a second time. So they said, the top of the leaderboard on this date will get a Fitbit, right? And so even though 90% of them had already done it once, we wanted to get them to do it again. So we added another incentive to do that. So we're still exploring, but there's lots of creative things we can do.
As we're getting close to the end of this, Scott, just a reminder, maybe you can pull up the slide again, just so everyone has it, is that if they want to get a demo with you, a trial account, next step with ClickArmor, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. So you can go to clickarmor.ca/MSP. And that's our MSP program application page. So there's a form there you'll fill out. One of the first things that we'll do is offer to have a call. And so we'll be able to do a live demo. You can book a call in our calendar in a time that works for you. And we'll do the live demo. We can then also set you up with a trial account. If you really want to, we can actually set up right now our trial account is set up in a community organization. So you'll see others there. But if you want to set up a private trial, we can do that for a limited time as well.
Excellent. Well, just a couple last questions that floated in here. Patrick was asking, do you offer white labeling of the product?
Yes, that's coming. It's not in the product right at this moment, but it's within the next few weeks.
Curious on this one. This one didn't come in, but I saw a couple of Canadians on here. I know it's a popular question. Do you have Canadian pricing as well as US pricing?
Well, contact us separately and we'll work something out for you. It might not be a change of numbers. That's a hint.
All right. And then last one that I'm seeing on here, unless JP, you had another one, is how do you compare, and this kind of is a summary of it, of wrapping things up, is that how do you compare your product with some of the others that are out there that MSPs are using, of the other tools that they're using? There's the obvious question, or the obvious answer is the gamification piece of it, but
yeah.
What would be the top two or three things that are out there of how you compare and are better?
Yeah, so I'll take a stab, and JP, feel free to jump in too. But basically, when you've got stuff that is delivered by video, it's really hard to change. It's hard to make it relevant. And so I think that's something that is really important when you're deploying to a customer, to have the opportunity to change the content to meet their policies and terminology and things like that. So that's number one, is the customization capabilities. We have the done for you model, which means that there's minimal impact on being able to activate and onboard everybody for you. You don't get the tool fatigue. And I don't think that there's anything else that has a similar pricing model. But if we want to just dig into the actual gamification itself, there's really nothing on the market that has the level of interactivity right down to every question and answer, has, things like, the coins flying around. So there's constant engagement. So that is definitely we call it deep gamification, right? Much, much different than any other kind of learning management system that you might have. So those would be the things that I would point out. JP, did you have any others you wanted to mention?
No, I think those are good points. And the other one would be the repeatability as well, right? So I can go back, I can redo something if I don't understand it, or I want to get a perfect score, or I want to move up the leaderboard, that type of thing. Again, great ambition here, but I think this is something we can achieve. Wouldn't it be awesome for the industry if we could provide some sort of cyber aware or cyber secure or cyber safe designation for an employee? Over time, I would think that would become a valuable asset as an employee, but also as an employer, right? To at least have the confidence that we've provided our employees with, everything that we could have done to make them aware and allow them to identify and to avoid all the common cybersecurity threats and pitfalls, right? So we'll get there over time as well.
Yeah, so I'd really say in wrapping it up on the call of where it's a super simple call to action of just going there, setting up a demo account. It's worthwhile of going in and at minimum with it of going and checking it out, getting more of a full tool demo versus the webinar demo that we just clicked through on this. Being able to get Scott with Scott and the team, just able to walk through all of these and see really of what it looks like from a user side of things. And a former MSP myself here, I know that this is not something that's going away any time at all. I mean, this is going to be just a forever going future.
Yeah.
And as someone that's been a consumer of the products from an employee standpoint of it, is that I know as I'm going through, it's boring as can be of whatever tools that we're using, not naming of anyone, but whatever tools that are using there. And it's trying to click through them as quick as possible so that I can get back to everything else that I'm doing. Can't say that I really learned a thing. I can fool myself in saying that I knew more than most going into it, which is probably true, but still, I didn't learn anything from it other than just getting my gold seal of approval of whatever it is that I finished all of the tests in as short of a period of time as possible. And fun was not something that was included in it. And I couldn't even imagine what everyone else on the team that didn't have that technical background, that didn't participate in a lot of things within the industry, people in just the regular everyday jobs that are here at the company of what they were doing on this of going through. I'm sure they were just bored out of their minds of going through. So one last time, Scott, you can maybe just read it off. It's I believe
clickarmor.ca/MSP. Yeah, I'll put it back up. Sorry, I keep taking it off. There you go.
Fine.
And just to reiterate what JP said, we are young. We've got lots of ideas for moving forward, and we'd love to work as more than just a reselling kind of partner, but as a partner that can help evolve the product and the solution to be more valuable over time. So that's something you may not get from other partners.
All right, excellent. Well, Scott, JP, thank you so much for getting on here and being able to share this out with the community. I know it's been something you've really been itching to do, and I think you guys are really going to take off with this.
Awesome.
Our pleasure. Thanks,
really
everyone.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys.